The first sound that made me stop was laughter, not loud, not careless, but controlled. The kind people use when they are certain the person they're talking about will never hear it. It carried no joy, only certainty, and it rooted me in place before I understood why. I stood still in the narrow hallway of a perfectly decorated house, holding a ceramic cup of tea that had already gone cold. My fingers were wrapped around it, steady, practiced, even as something inside me shifted quietly into place. In that moment, without drama or denial, I understood a truth I had avoided for years. I had never been part of this family. I had only been tolerated. My name is Alyssa Hartman. I am 28 years old, and for almost 3 years, I have been in a long-term relationship with Ethan Crowley, who is 31. To the outside world, we look reasonable and safe, a couple without chaos. A woman who fits quietly into her partner's life. A man dependable enough to build a future with. That image was not an accident. I allowed it because it protected me. The Crowleys are the kind of family that speaks softly but thinks loudly. Their words are polite, measured, and carefully chosen, but their judgments are sharp and constant. Ethan's mother, Judith Crowley, controls every room without raising her voice, directing conversations the way others move furniture. His older brother, Nathan, speaks with polished confidence learned in boardrooms and mirrors, always certain he is the smartest person present. His sister, Lillian, hides criticism inside humor, smiling as she delivers it so no one can accuse her of cruelty. And then there is Marianne Doyle, not family by blood, but always present. She observes rather than performs. She watches me differently, sometimes with concern, sometimes as if she sees what the others choose not to acknowledge. They all share one belief. They believe I am unremarkable. They think I work an ordinary job and earn an average income. They believe my future depends on Ethan's success, that I am grateful to be chosen, easily replaceable, and simple enough to overlook. They speak to me as if I should be careful not to ask for too much. They are wrong. What they do not know is that I am a lead financial recovery consultant at Virex Global Advisory, an international firm specializing in corporate crisis management, forensic accounting, and executive risk assessment. I analyze failing companies, trace financial misconduct, restructure debt, and advise shareholders when entire empires stand on the edge of collapse. I manage teams, audit internal systems, and decide whether companies survive or disappear. I earn $35,000 every month. Ethan does not know this. Neither does his family. That silence was intentional. When I was 17, my great-grandfather once told me, if people know you have money, they stop seeing who you are. They start calculating what they can take. At the time, the words felt harsh and unfair. Over time, life proved him right. So when my career began to succeed, I learned how to disappear behind modesty. I dress simply, avoid conversations about work, and let people underestimate me, not because I lack confidence, but because observation is easier when no one is watching you back. Silence, when chosen, is a position of advantage. Ethan and I met 4 years ago at a professional networking event in Seattle. Back then, he was attentive, curious, and kind in a way that felt genuine and unforced. When he proposed 2 years later, the feeling wasn't passion, it was stability. And I convinced myself that stability was enough. His ex-girlfriend, Samantha Reed, never fully left the room. Judith called her ambitious. Nathan admired her openly. Lillian compared us without using names, letting implication do the work. The message was always clear, even when it was never spoken aloud. At family dinners, the insults were subtle, soft enough to deny, sharp enough to feel. "You're so simple, Alyssa," Lillian once said with a smile, "it must be nice not needing much." Judith often added, "Some women are content with very little." Ethan would shift in his seat, sometimes he would say, "That's not fair," but his words never carried weight. Once, while clearing dishes, Marianne leaned toward me and whispered, "They're wrong about you." I smiled and thanked her. I did not explain. The night everything changed, we were gathered at Judith's house for what was supposed to be a quiet family dinner, nothing formal, no raised voices. I excused myself to get tea, and that was when I heard them. Judith and Nathan were in the kitchen, their voices lowered, careless in their certainty. I stopped in the hallway, unseen. "We need to get rid of her," Judith said calmly. Nathan answered without hesitation, "She knows nothing, she doesn't belong in this family, Samantha was a better match." Then came the sentence that made everything painfully clear. "The company is collapsing," Nathan said, "we can use her, she won't notice." I stood there, silent and invisible, finally understanding my place in their plans. And I listened. I did not move for several seconds after their voices faded into running water and clinking dishes. My body remained still, but my mind was already working calmly and efficiently. Judith's words were not shocking because they were cruel, they were shocking because they were deliberate. This was not rejection. It was strategy. I returned to the dining room with measured steps, my posture unchanged, my expression neutral. Ethan looked up and smiled at me, the same familiar smile that once made me feel chosen. I smiled back, just enough to appear present, not enough to invite questions. That night, back in our apartment, Ethan talked about his day, about meetings that led nowhere, about pressure from his family. Northvale Industrial Group, he said, had been struggling for months, rising costs, unstable contracts, bad timing. I listened carefully, nodded at the right moments, and asked gentle questions that made me sound supportive but uninformed. Inside, I was already separating facts from excuses. Companies rarely collapse because of timing, they collapse because someone makes decisions without accountability. In the days that followed, I became more observant than ever. I watched how Judith spoke to Ethan, never asking directly for help but constantly reminding him of duty. I watched Nathan arrive at family gatherings in new suits, expensive watches catching the light, always talking about stress and sacrifice. I watched Lillian complain about minor inconveniences while reinforcing the idea that I should be grateful simply to be included. And through all of it, I stayed quiet, modest, agreeable, exactly what they expected. At work, my world looked very different. At Virex Global Advisory, I was leading a restructuring analysis for a manufacturing firm on the edge of bankruptcy. I reviewed balance sheets, traced irregular expenses, and uncovered hidden transfers into private accounts. Patterns like these become familiar when you've seen them often enough. That familiarity followed me home. One evening, while Ethan showered, his laptop lit up on the coffee table. I wasn't looking for it, but the company name caught my eye. Northvale Industrial Group. A forwarded internal report. I didn't open it, I didn't need to. The subject line was enough. Emergency liquidity review, unauthorized expenditure discrepancies. From that moment on, I stopped guessing. I started confirming. I paid attention to numbers mentioned casually in conversation, loan amounts, vendor names, delayed projects. One supplier Judith complained about stood out immediately. Rexford Logistics Group. I knew that name well. 2 years earlier, I had audited a company that used Rexford to move money through inflated service invoices. The structure had been identical, shell accounts, paper trails. And I remembered who had signed off on them. Nathan. Still, I said nothing. Family gatherings continued, each one sharper than the last. Judith commented on my limited ambition. Lillian joked about how I would finally understand responsibility once I became a Crowley officially. Ethan occasionally defended me, but his voice lacked conviction. He was tired, overwhelmed, torn. And slowly, I realized his silence was no longer confusion. It was a choice. Marianne remained the only one who treated me like a person. During one dinner, she pulled me aside and asked quietly, "Are you okay here?" "I'm paying attention," I said. She studied me for a moment, then nodded, as if she understood far more than I had said. A month later, Ethan announced a family event, formal, important. He looked nervous but hopeful. Judith's eyes shone with satisfaction. Nathan seemed relieved. Lillian spoke excitedly about appearances and expectations. No one asked what I wanted. That night, Ethan proposed in front of them all. The ring was thin, lightweight, the diamond small and poorly cut. It wasn't about the price, it was about effort, about thought, about how little attention he had given to something meant to represent a lifetime. He knelt, his hands trembling slightly. I looked at his face, at the people behind him, at the future they had already decided for me. And I said yes. They smiled, they hugged me, Judith whispered, "Welcome to the family," Nathan raised a glass, Lillian laughed. And inside, I felt nothing but clarity. Because by then, I already knew exactly how this would end. After the proposal, everything moved faster on the surface and slower underneath. The family began planning the engagement celebration almost immediately, speaking over me instead of to me. Dates were suggested, venues discussed, guest lists drafted. Judith took control with quiet authority, treating the event less like a union of two people and more like a strategic alignment. Nathan spoke about how important it would be for the right people to attend. Lillian focused on appearances, colors, lighting, and how everything needed to look elevated. I nodded when expected and smiled when required. I stayed exactly where they wanted me, present, agreeable, and powerless. Ethan changed too, though he never seemed to notice it himself. He became distracted, checked his phone more often, stepped outside to take calls he didn't explain. When I asked gently, he blamed stress, the company, family pressure. I accepted the explanation outwardly. Inwardly, I began connecting details with professional discipline. Stress does not make someone secretive. Guilt does. At work, my schedule intensified. Virex Global Advisory assigned me to oversee a confidential investigation involving cross-border fund transfers and executive misconduct. I spent long hours tracing money through layered accounts designed to disappear, following patterns meant to look accidental but never truly were. This was my expertise, and with every spreadsheet I reviewed, every report I approved, my certainty grew. The Crowley family company was not simply struggling, it was being drained. One evening, while Ethan was out with his brother, I opened my encrypted laptop and accessed a restricted database reserved for senior consultants handling high-risk corporate collapses. I searched the supplier names I had heard repeatedly at family dinners. Rexford Logistics Group appeared immediately, flagged in multiple prior investigations involving inflated invoices, shell subsidiaries, and personal accounts tied to executives' relatives. The approval signatures were consistent. Nathan Crowley. I didn't rush. I cross-referenced dates, amounts, and payment paths until a clear picture formed. Company funds had been diverted into reckless investments, losses quietly concealed through accounting adjustments, luxury expenses disguised as operational costs. A private offshore account, registered under a consulting entity, received regular transfers shortly after key internal approvals. The numbers were precise. The pattern undeniable. I saved everything. Meanwhile, the family dinners continued as if nothing had changed. Judith spoke openly about sacrifice and contribution once I officially became a Crowley. Lillian joked about how I would finally be useful. Nathan avoided my eyes but never his confidence. They still believed I knew nothing. Marianne watched more closely now. One evening, she said quietly that I seemed calmer than most people would be. I told her I preferred clarity to reaction, and she nodded as if confirming something to herself. The next discovery came unexpectedly. One morning, Ethan left his tablet unlocked on the couch, a message notification glowing softly. The name caught my attention instantly. Samantha Reed. I sat down and read everything. The messages weren't ambiguous, they referenced meetings, regret, familiarity, a closeness that crossed every boundary. He had told her about the engagement. She responded with sympathy and intimacy. When Ethan came home that night, he lied easily about his day. I listened and understood something important. His silence was no longer weakness. It was complicity. As the engagement celebration approached, the family buzzed with anticipation, convinced they were tightening their grip on the future. I remained exactly as they expected, quiet, modest, unaware. But my plan was complete. Every document organized, every message saved, every number verified. I was no longer observing. I was preparing. The weeks leading up to the celebration unfolded like a rehearsed performance. Judith called often, framing instructions as concern, reminding me how important this event was for Ethan, for the company, for appearances. Ethan grew more distant, hiding behind routine gestures and vague talk of the future. It became clear that marriage, to him, wasn't a partnership. It was a solution meant to stabilize his world without asking him to change. At one family dinner, Judith discussed finances openly for the first time in front of me, insisting the company was merely restructuring. Nathan nodded confidently, speaking of strategic plans. I smiled and offered more water while reviewing the numbers in my head. Northvale Industrial Group was hemorrhaging. Credit lines were nearly exhausted, contracts already lost, vendors demanding cash up front. I had seen this before. Denial always came before collapse. A few days later, an internal email arrived at work. Northvale Industrial Group had been flagged for irregular financial behavior linked to an executive account. I reassigned the case professionally to avoid conflict of interest. I didn't need official access. I already had everything. The engagement celebration arrived on a crisp evening, the venue glowing with expensive decor meant to project confidence. They dressed carefully, as if appearance alone could hold things together. Ethan spoke first, thanking his family and praising my patience. His words were safe, familiar, empty. When Judith turned to me and asked if I wanted to say something, I stood without hesitation. I felt no anger, no fear. Only clarity. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. I told them I had been quiet not because I had nothing to say, but because I needed to understand where I stood. I spoke of honesty, of learning how people treat you when they believe you have nothing to offer. Then I told them about the conversation I had overheard months ago, about being disposable, about not belonging, about another woman being a better match. The room shifted. I continued calmly. I spoke of the plan to use me because I wouldn't notice. I corrected that assumption. Then I turned to Nathan and said what mattered most. Northvale Industrial Group didn't fail because of market conditions. It failed because of internal misconduct. Fraudulent expenses approved under his authority. Payments routed through Rexford Logistics Group. Personal accounts masked as consulting entities. Reckless investments without board approval. Luxury spending disguised as operational costs. The room fell silent. Not a whisper. Not a breath. I reviewed the documents, I said calmly. Invoices, transfer records, offshore account statements, dates, amounts, signatures. I didn't raise my voice. The numbers were clear. Lillian shook her head, refusing comprehension, while Judith half rose from her chair, her voice sharp as she called it inappropriate and claimed I didn't know what I was talking about. I told her simply that I did. Then I turned to Ethan. I spoke softly, but without hesitation. While all of this had been happening, he had stayed in contact with Samantha Reed. Messages, emails, meetings, coffee, dinner, conversations about regret and what might have been. I told him I had read everything. When he tried to explain, I stopped him. His silence when it mattered had already said enough. There was one last thing they needed to understand. They had believed I was insignificant because I chose not to display my value. That was my mistake. I introduced myself properly then, as Alyssa Hartman, a lead financial recovery consultant at Virex Global Advisory, specializing in corporate collapse prevention and forensic financial analysis. I stated my income plainly. $35,000 a month. The silence that followed was absolute. I told them I never needed this family, this company, or to be used. I removed the ring and let it fall to the floor. The sound was small, insignificant, perfect. I placed the microphone back and walked away without looking back, my steps steady, controlled, certain that there was nothing left to explain. Outside, the night air felt sharp and clean. I paused and took a full breath, the first in years without calculating how it might be interpreted. Ethan followed me, panicked, asking why I had done it that way. I told him quietly that this was how it had been done to me, without respect, without choice. When he reached for my arm, I stepped back. His excuses came quickly: pressure, mistakes, confusion, history. I interrupted gently. It had meant enough for him to hide it, enough to lie, and that told me everything. Judith appeared, accusing me of humiliating them, of destroying the family. I felt no satisfaction, only distance. I told her I had revealed what was already there. Behind her, Nathan stood silent, his confidence gone, Lillian whispering desperately beside him. Mary Ann stood apart. When our eyes met, she nodded once, not in approval, but in understanding. I left without another word. That night, I checked into a hotel near the river under my own name and sat by the window long after midnight, watching city lights fracture across dark water. My phone buzzed constantly, calls, messages, voicemails. I didn't answer. This silence wasn't strategy. It was freedom. In the days that followed, the fallout unfolded exactly as expected. Northvale Industrial Group entered formal investigation, accounts were frozen, auditors arrived, Nathan's name appeared in documents he could no longer control. Judith reached out through intermediaries and lawyers, apologies carefully worded to avoid responsibility. I declined every request. Ethan sent long messages filled with regret and confusion. I read them once, then archived them. I moved into a new apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. Quiet, bright, mine. I unpacked slowly, choosing what to keep and what to release. At work, my life returned to its natural rhythm, focused, precise, respected for what I do, not what I appear to be. Sometimes I thought about the woman I had been when I first met Ethan, the one who believed patience could replace respect. I felt no bitterness toward her, only gratitude. The weeks after I left were quiet, not empty, but undisturbed. My days were no longer shaped by someone else's expectations. I woke early because my mind was clear. Nothing in the apartment carried history yet. Every object was intentional. Every decision was mine. Work grounded me. At Virex Global Advisory, no one asked me to be smaller or softer. Meetings were direct, accountability expected. I guided another failing company through restructuring, helping a board face truths they had avoided. Truth, when faced directly, is never as destructive as denial. News of Northvale Industrial Group reached me anyway. The investigation expanded, regulators confirmed offshore accounts, reckless investments became documented losses. Judith tried to regain control of the narrative, but language couldn't stabilize a compromised foundation. The family's confidence dissolved quietly, the same way it had always existed, behind closed doors. Ethan tried once more, this time with a long, careful email. He admitted fear, weakness, reliance on my silence. He said he finally understood. I read it without hope or resentment. Regret without responsibility is only reaction. I replied with 3 sentences. I wished him stability. I told him I was no longer available for explanation or repair. I told him this silence was not punishment. It was closure. Marianne reached out once. We met briefly at a quiet cafe. She said only that she had seen more than they thought. I nodded. That was enough. When we parted, her hug felt final. As winter settled in, I felt ease. Not dramatic happiness, but steadiness. I cooked without rushing, walked without replaying conversations, slept without bracing for disappointment. My great-grandfather had been right about people calculating what they can take, but he had never said hiding forever was the goal. Knowing when to reveal yourself mattered. I hadn't lost a family that night. I released one that never intended to keep me. Time created distance, and within that distance, perspective settled naturally. By the 3rd month, the city outside my window felt like movement again. Morning walks, quiet breakfasts, evenings without emotional weight. Life simplified once I stopped carrying other people's expectations. My role at work expanded. I led a multinational recovery project, coordinating legal teams and executive boards. In those rooms, my voice carried weight because it was built on competence, not compromise. I realized how long I had been shrinking outside of work and how unnecessary that habit had always been. Occasionally, unknown numbers appeared on my phone. One voicemail slipped through. Judith again. Calm, controlled, asking for reconciliation. I deleted it without replaying. Some doors close quietly because reopening them serves no purpose. The investigation concluded as expected. Regulatory findings confirmed misconduct, assets were lost, Northvale Industrial Group entered formal dissolution. There was no dramatic collapse, only the certainty that follows prolonged denial. I felt no satisfaction, only confirmation. One evening, I found the engagement ring in a small box. I held it without sadness. It represented endurance mistaken for loyalty. I donated it the next day. Some symbols are only useful once. As spring approached, my life expanded subtly. New connections, conversations without restraint, rooms where I never needed to shrink. Strength did not announce itself. It simply moved freely, once nothing was trying to contain it. I thought less often about the past, not because it lost meaning, but because it had completed its purpose. Every experience sharpened my awareness, every silence taught me timing. I no longer observed from the edges. I had nothing to prove and nothing to hide. For the first time in a long while, the future felt open, not demanding or conditional, simply available. By early summer, my life no longer felt like something I was rebuilding. It felt established again, just in a different form. The quiet I once associated with isolation now felt like control. I chose when to speak, when to engage, when to withdraw, and that choice alone changed everything. Without constantly managing other people's discomfort, my days felt longer in the best way. At Virex Global Advisory, I was invited to speak at an internal strategy summit attended only by senior partners. I presented a case study on early detection of internal financial misconduct, focusing on patterns, red flags, and the long-term cost of executive denial. I didn't mention names. I didn't need to. When I finished, the managing director said this kind of clarity was what prevented collapse. I knew then that my voice was exactly where it belonged. Outside of work, I kept my life simple. I reconnected with old friends without explanation or defense. Conversations were lighter, acceptance genuine. One afternoon, I ran into a former colleague from years earlier, and as we parted, something became clear. I was no longer measuring myself against anyone, not Ethan, not his family, not even the woman I used to be. Growth had become internal, not reactive. The Crowley name surfaced one last time during a professional call, mentioned neutrally in reference to the dissolution of Northvale Industrial Group. There was no judgment or curiosity attached to it. I acknowledged it and moved on. The chapter had ended not with confrontation, but with irrelevance, and I realized that was the most complete ending possible. Late one night, sitting on my balcony, I thought about my great-grandfather again. His warning had protected me, but it had also shaped my distance. I understood then that secrecy is a tool, not a lifestyle. It serves a purpose until it no longer does. I knew who I was, and I knew what I would never accept again. I did not regret loving Ethan. I regretted staying silent when my boundaries were tested. But regret loses its power when examined honestly. I had learned, and learning compounds positively. As summer deepened, balance settled in. Not relief or triumph, just steadiness. I stopped reacting to what had happened and began planning forward without reference to it. The past returned to its proper place, not as a lens, but as context. Soon after, Virex offered me leadership of a new internal division focused on early intervention for private companies showing signs of internal misconduct. The work required discretion, authority, and clarity. I accepted without hesitation, not because it was easy, but because it aligned with who I had become. I led with precision and restraint, understanding that clarity delivered at the right moment creates accountability. Outside of work, I became intentional rather than guarded. I no longer over-explained or softened expectations. When asked about my past engagement, I answered briefly and honestly. It no longer defined me. Those who respected that boundary stayed. Others drifted away naturally. Ethan reached out once with a short message, saying he was trying to learn from what he had lost. I believed him. I did not respond. Growth does not always require acknowledgement. Marianne sent a handwritten note thanking me for my honesty, saying it forced her to examine things she had ignored for years. I folded the note and placed it in a drawer. It felt complete. As the year progressed, I moved differently through the world. I spoke plainly, listened carefully, and walked away when respect was absent. These were not defenses. They were standards. What I gained was not dramatic independence, but self-trust, the quiet confidence of knowing I would act in alignment with my values. There were moments of loneliness, but they were honest ones. Solitude is only painful when you abandon yourself inside it. I no longer did. By autumn, my life settled into a rhythm that felt intentional. My days were full but not crowded. At work, the division I led had already prevented multiple corporate collapses. The respect I received was not admiration. It was trust, built on consistency. Occasionally, the past resurfaced in small ways, a familiar street, a song, a place. These moments no longer carried pain. They carried information. I honored the woman I had been for surviving a life that was never designed for her. As winter approached, I felt grounded. Not because everything was perfect, but because nothing felt misaligned. I trusted my instincts, my boundaries, and my willingness to walk away. I once believed endurance was a virtue. Now I understood that discernment is. This chapter of my life closed quietly, without ceremony, exactly as it should have. I did not wake up transformed. I simply stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen and stopped fixing things that were never mine to repair. Stability, I learned, is built by letting go. My life now is quiet, but not small. Full without being crowded. Honest without being harsh. I do not perform roles or accept imposed silence. When I speak, it is by choice. When I am quiet, it is because peace asks for nothing more. I did not win against anyone. I did not destroy a family. I did not expose the truth to be admired. I simply refused to continue being underestimated. And that refusal changed everything. If this story resonated with you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes the quietest decisions are the ones that change a life forever. Thank you for being here and listening until the end. If you've ever been underestimated, remember this: you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to be clear.